Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks show. You may have noticed that we took a holiday off and it's still the off season, so not as much exciting. One thing to note, you may have noticed we have not gone on our Monday date in a bit, and pretty much the reason is football is back, so we'll probably be looking at a new time. We'll keep you posted on that. With that said, I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, aka NerdNumbers. Patrick is finally back on the show with me. You can find him on Twitter as NBA Geek. Patrick, give a shout out.
Hey guys, how's it going?
And then also, as always, we are produced by our amazing producer, Brian Foster, who you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Say something, Brian.
What's going on, guys? And yeah, speaking of the video show, one thing I noticed is there's no glasses for anyone on the show tonight. Maybe a first time ever.
That's because I couldn't find my glasses.
Spectacle free.
I could not find mine, is the honest truth. And so if you hear me misread numbers, like if I start saying stuff like, Steve Nash got 20 assists per game or something, it's probably because I'm just not able to read the small text on Basketball Reference or something.
No fancy contact lenses. It's the blind leading the semi-blind.
I don't like contacts, so pretty much it's I can't see that well, or I wear my glasses. Luckily, my eyes aren't that bad. Exciting off-season news. All right. So anyway, we basically just have a hodgepodge of topics. We're going to talk paying college athletes, Kevin Johnson being a secret supervillain, Jerry West not liking analytics, trying to get as obvious to everybody else, but we've been talking about how just ludicrous the idea of like paying college athletes is. And you see all of these people that say you can't pay them for all of these reasons, and they're even starting to capitulate a little. Like the end of this article, I think basically said, hey, it's fine if an athlete actually wants to get paid for an autograph, we can do that. But paying them is just not enough, and it's worth noting that under the current NCAA rules, both aren't allowed. But anyway, so Pac-12 paying athletes. Brian, lead us in.
Yeah, so I'll say something brief about this and then defer to Patrick, since he was actually the one that brought this up. But I guess here's the one thing I had about the tone of this article. It said, it kind of felt to me like here's, a way to get there, right? Here's a way to keep everyone happy, like it's the Trojan horse, but I tend to agree more with what I feel like your kind of thoughts were just now, which is it's just not going far enough. Like it's a good start, but we've got a lot farther to go.
And so anything, Patrick? Sorry.
Well, I just think as the article points out, if you read the fine print, basically the Pac-12 is saying athletes can make money on non-athletic endeavors, but they're not allowed to make any money if their name is the reason. Basically, if it basically says you can't like promote yourself as a famous college football player, then your name can't be the basis of it. So, which sort of brings up the question of, okay, why would anybody want to pay for a college athlete unless they get to pay for the name? And it all goes back to this crazy, convoluted, the absolutely absurd logistical gymnastics that the NCAA or any division in the NCAA needs to jump through in order to keep up the pretense that this isn't a money-making machine and that these aren't employees. It's just kind of, the NBA literally says we don't pay our players because they're amateurs, and they're amateurs because we don't pay them. That literally is
NCAA, right? The
logic.
The NBA underpays players, and actually, we can get into that in a second. That's a funny one, but yeah, the NCAA. The other point to what you're saying, Patrick, here is what makes this really rough is the NCAA is just kind of this weird monolithic group that decides what that means. So, for instance, if I'm an NCAA player who, I have time to get a job at a McDonald's, but I get a job at a McDonald's and I get promoted to assistant manager. If the NCAA believes that I was promoted because of my stature as a college athlete, and how would anybody in a college town not know who I am? They could, in theory, deem me ineligible, and that's somewhat arbitrary. And the NCAA doesn't have the people to really properly enforce its rules, so it basically just periodically makes scapegoats out of people to say, "Hey, we're doing something." So it's even worse than what you're saying, right? With the can't make name off your image. It's like if the NCAA suspects that you are using your name and that's why you got hired or promoted, and who's to say it wouldn't be, right? I mean, it's worth noting that colleges have no problem letting people in because their parents went there, because their grandpa donated a building. So it's really odd to, suddenly a college goes, wait, we can't just trust people on their name to give them unfair advantages. We never do that.
Yeah, and obviously when the real problem, the real reason the Pac-12 or the NCAA doesn't want it to be that way is because that establishes some kind of precedent that their name actually has some economic value. Because right now the pretense is, oh, well, they're amateurs. So, I mean, people are only watching this because they want to see the true spirit of, watching
Yeah,
amateurs compete, not because of.
the BS Ravel point a while back where Darren Ravel said, most people can't name 10 people on the field, ergo they're not watching it for those 10 players.
Yeah, first of all, I think if you picked out I think if you went to a random college football game and surveyed the people in attendance, I'm gonna go ahead and guess that you would not be able to find very many people that cannot name 10 players on the field. In fact, I think the vast majority of players can name the entire offensive starting line.
Yeah.
Like the players that are like literally only in the fucking handbook. I bet most of the people that actually attend a college football game can name them.
Well, and also if it's a college town, these guys are like members of the community. They're out there. They're going to restaurants. People are seeing them, and
Yeah.
since they're football players too, they're literally larger than life.
Yeah,
So
and I think it's fascinating because the NCAA's biggest like bullshit argument whenever they say that they should be paying athletes is that they give them an education, and this education supposedly is worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, so they don't need to pay them. But then, of course, anybody who's ever been even remotely involved with college athletics knows that if you're really into the college team, you actually don't have time to study because your coach makes the assumption that you put the sport first, whether it's football or basketball or even baseball. The team comes first and your studies come second. And that is pretty well understood at any big time college program. So I'm thinking, is it only a matter of time before some player sues the university saying, well, the university's giving me this college education to play football, but coach isn't actually letting me go to the right classes, so I'm suing him because he's essentially trying to deprive me of that thing that you're telling me you're paying me in
Oh,
order to
Patrick,
play football.
you need to get on some class action lawsuit and help the
Well,
players
but I
out.
mean,
I
can you
I,
even
I, I
imagine
agree.
the circular arguments that are going to go back and forth here, where the school tries to pretend that, okay, education comes first, except in every realistic, practical way, they put the coaches and the whole organization put the sport first. And so they jump through these crazy, crazy mental gymnastic hoops to try and justify the exploitive system that is in place. It's
Well, one of my favorite stories, I think he said it on our podcast, was Paul Shirley, or it was in one of his books or on one of the Short Corner podcasts. But former NBA player Paul Shirley mentioned that he had to take the GRE for grad school, and he wasn't actually on athletic scholarship. He was on an academic scholarship and was a walk-on at Iowa State. I hope I got that right. I know I've messed it up before. Colleges are confusing. State, not state, whatever. You're stupid.
he
Colleges
was
go.
an Iowa State Cyclone.
Thank you. But he mentioned that he got made fun of by his coach when he said, hey, can I miss practice tomorrow? I have to take the GRE. Now, one of the fun games I've seen people do is like replace this word with that word. So I noticed recently with Carson saying a Muslim shouldn't be president, they said, okay, just take this quote, replace the word Muslim with Jew and see how it reads. And
Mhm.
so any article you read on college athletics with coaches, replace the word coach with teacher or dean. And so imagine if you were reading an article that said, the dean of Harvard University made fun of Paul Shirley for saying he had to take the GRE. What are you saying here? Do you really think the GRE is more important than football? Said the dean of Harvard, right? If that was a story that came out, you'd go, what are you talking about? And
Yeah.
that's really, really common, like you're saying in sports, right? You can take so many quotes that coaches take, and in theory, this is an institute of learning where the coach is supposed to be part of that. And if you've got someone who's part of your institute of learning saying, don't go to class, don't take these tests, get sleep,
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. If you
Great.
imagine the arguments between any like labor union and any management, And if management was saying a bunch of things, but then in their offices acting in completely opposite of that manner, all of management's lawyers would be saying, "Fucking, you got to stop doing this. You're sabotaging your case. You got to stop like acting completely different in the office than what the way you're telling the labor union that you're acting. You can't do that. It's totally undermining our case." And yet that's exactly what's happening in the NCAA. Is this constant like, they get an education, so we don't need to pay them, and education comes first, and then they turn around and act completely otherwise, and it's only a matter of time before the system implodes. It might not happen in the next year or two, but it seriously can only be a matter of time before the college sports system just completely implodes the way it is right now.
That is true, but we kind of had this long discussion on concussions in the Will Smith biopic a few shows ago, and it's just worth noting that if you have something that's deeply entrenched, it's true that it will get forced to move, but it will, bury its teeth for as long as possible. And that's what
Oh,
we're
absolutely. Yeah, yeah. It won't move at all until it does.
But I'm saying it is funny that we are noticing like these random capitulations that the systems are making where they're saying, hey, maybe it's okay if we don't mind that players get free food. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it's okay.
But as long as they're not getting the free food, because people like them and that they play college football, they can't be getting the free food for that reason.
And I know this is broken record for a lot of longtime fans of the show. I want to end on one note there, which is just the movie The Blindside, which has a lot of funny white privilege versus helping less fortunate people, all sorts of fun issues in there. But basically, the villain of that movie is the NCAA saying, "Can you imagine what would happen if a bunch of rich white people started funneling underprivileged black people into college to help their football teams?" That was the NCAA's argument in the movie. And the thing is, for all the stuff that movie changed, Sandra Bullock, the person she's based on, did not go and confront a gang leader on her own and threaten him and come away alive, because that's absurd. Give me a break, Hollywood. But that is the legitimate case of the NCAA, where they legitimately go and say, can you imagine what would happen if we started giving poor black people money? And they still do that. And here's hoping that changes at some point in the future. And we'll probably keep talking about
because
it until it does.
I mean, our response should really always be like, okay, serious question, would that be a bad thing? Like if basically a bunch of rich white folks decided to make a bunch of poor black folks be not quite as poor in order to help their football teams, would that really be a terrible thing?
And it's also worth noting, we talk concussions, we might talk more on it, but it's like these people are sacrificing their body. I think that came out this week more on the Boston University CTE thing. I think the number they have is 96% of people who've donated their brains have confirmed it. And I forget
let's put the same caveat that anyone else does, that there's a huge selection bias here, right? Because only somebody who's experiencing symptoms is going to even stop and say, wow, maybe I should donate my brain to science. So there's definitely a huge selection bias. I think the study is basically saying 96% of people who thought they had CTE actually had CTE.
Who also played professional sports and heard about CTE. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, and I forget, a former Packer tweeted out and said, I probably have CTE. Awesome. Which is a fun way to start his day. But anyway, the simple point there being, we're basically asking people to sacrifice their bodies, and we mentioned selection bias. No one remembers all of the players that don't make the NBA, that don't complete their college degree, that blow out their knee in year 2, and as a result lose their scholarship and don't get a degree, don't get a thing, and just move on. And so, but it's weird that we're like, it's okay for you to sacrifice your body for free, but heaven forbid you make money on it. And like I said, broken record, you'll hear us keep saying that because it's this ludicrous, but it's still there and it's not going anywhere. So,
yeah, I mean, I think football at some point is going to implode too. That's only a matter of time. But it clearly isn't. So, despite the fact that we're all getting smarter about this, it doesn't seem to be affecting the popularity of the sport at all. Football's ratings are going through the roof.
Well, there's a lot to be said for having, in terms of all of the sports, it's one of the most culturally entrenched in the United States, as well as being one of the most random. I mean, that's the point, right? You can go to, how many 0-2 teams are there this season, including your own Seattle, what's the Seahawks? Yeah, Seahawks. I don't know. I even watched that game too. I was really hoping Marshawn Lynch would do something, and he didn't. So I was very disappointed. Um, but yeah, the Seahawks, right? We have all these different teams that are 0-2 that people are shocked by.
Yeah.
Football is one of the most random sports, so it's like it's fun to watch because it's random,
Yeah,
it's culturally entrenched.
the level of like correlation between one year and the next is really low in football compared to other sports.
And so, I mean, I think for sports fans, it's a lot of fun because even with our belief that the 76ers have improved through the draft and, Noel's going to get older and they might have picked up a few good players, it's worth noting that barring something crazy, they're probably not making the playoffs this year. But if you're a football fan, if you're a Broncos fan, and you told me at the beginning of the season that Peyton Manning was going to look horrendous and we'd somehow still be 2-0, I wouldn't have believed you, but that is the case. So that's
Mhm.
one reason I think football is just still really popular. Is it's just so freaking random that if you are a fan of any team in the NFL, you legitimately can have hope for like 8 weeks of the season, which is like half the season. In the
Unless
NBA,
you're from Detroit.
there was that one year they were like doing all right. Remember?
What did they go 9-7 that one year that you're talking about?
Yeah, it was there. Well, I mean, there was that one year too. Dave was talking about it, how they had all these turnovers. I wrote a post on that, but they had all of these turnovers, and it's like, yeah, this team is better than they look. But that's football. So
Yeah.
it's not going to go anywhere until it does, like you point out. The same is true of college sports. And the thing is, this is sad to put it this way. Whenever you have a bunch of rich white people on one side fighting against a bunch of really, let's be honest, exploited poor people on the other, it usually takes a while for things to change, especially when popular
Absolutely, yeah.
when popular opinion is, I don't care, get out of my way, I just want to watch the game.
Yeah, so I mean that's the thing about college sports that always kind of like I get that the NCAA is going to sink its teeth in, but and I also understand the people who say I don't care because I don't give a shit. But what really gets me is those fans, the ones who have no money invested, who firmly believe that, oh, that would be terrible if we started paying college athletes. Like some random 45-year-old plumber in Minnesota I'm like, why do you fucking care whether or not a college athlete gets his due or not? Why is this a passion thing for you? And why, for God's sakes, why are you on the side of the millionaires here in this particular debate? I
That's
don't
always what
understand.
amuses me is why do people side with the millionaires and billionaires and argue? And when anybody, and again, I've said this argument millions of times. I'll say it millions more. I bet that's hyperbole. Whenever someone says millionaires versus billionaires, and says, why do we care about the millionaires versus the billionaires? Here's the answer. I have $1,000. You have $1. Do you want to trade your $1 for my $1,000? If you
Yeah.
said yes, then millionaires versus billionaires is a stupid argument unless you think $1,000 is worth a dollar, which no one out there
Yeah,
should.
and let's be honest, like there's some possibility that you and I might be a millionaire someday if all the cards roll right for us. There's no possibility that you and I will be billionaires, no matter how the
It's it's
cards roll.
it's like
So of
it's
course we
like the
should be on the
lottery.
side of the fucking
It's
millionaires.
like the lotteries. It's like the lottery. Right? There is a chance that you'll be a billionaire, but I like you would the number of odds you could give me
I
better than
mean,
a
like,
billion to one
so
odds, and I would take them
so I've worked for some
against.
startups, right? And I have some stock options from companies that may or may not go somewhere. And someday they might like sort of hit the jackpot and I might become a millionaire because of that, right? But there's no chance that I'm going to become a billionaire because of that. That's just
Oh
not
yeah,
going to happen, right? So of course I should be rooting for the millionaires. Maybe someday I could be one of them. But the billionaires, screw them. I'm never going to be one of them. Fuck those
well, and
guys.
also let's we got two stories on this. So Dave Barry was on a Think Progress article about the Washington Mystics, who are getting their own arena, or hopefully, basically, they're asking the taxpayers, please, the Washington Mystics, the WNBA, you want to support women's sports, right? We've been talking about this all year. Let's give them their own arena. Doesn't this help? And the answer is, are you freaking crazy? Even for women's sports, don't ever pay for arenas. And this one's even more ludicrous because essentially the way Dave phrased it in the article is essentially Washington wants a practice arena and they don't want to pay for it. So
Hmm.
they're going to ask the taxpayers, please give us a free practice arena for
The
our
Washington
millionaires.
Wizards, you're saying the men's
Yeah, the
team.
Wizards, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
because
way,
so the Mystics average, I think like 6,500 fans a game, and at their peak, they for big games, playoff games, I presume they've had like a sold out arena. And now you're going to go give them a 5,000 seat arena. So literally, you're going to take away 2 or 3,000 seats a night, and somehow that's improving things for the team. That's ridiculous.
And of course, the argument you might be able to make, this was the whole reason Seattle lost the Sonics, is, well, this new arena is going to have more expensive suites, but there's no way you're going to convince me that the Mystics arena is going to have better, luxury suites than an NBA arena in the same city. And there's no real reason. I mean, I believe it's not hard for professional sports teams, even popular ones. Look at the Lakers and the Clippers. And what's the hockey team, right? The hockey team plays in the same one, or am I mistaken? In Staples? The Kings?
I think they play in Staples, yeah.
Yeah, the Kings play there.
Yeah, so I mean, you can have three sports teams arguably popular. I think the Kings have been good recently. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I haven't been following hockey in a while.
They have been.
But basically, you can have three good popular teams in one arena and, schedule around it. And so,
not only that, you want to have populated because, I mean, if you're in an arena where there's a big event every night, then the arena has all kinds of infrastructure to handle that. They have the great PA system and a sound system and vendors who sell hot dogs and beer and all kinds of other stuff. If you're in some 5,000 seat arena where nothing ever fucking happens, well, what do you think is going to be like on game days? There isn't going to be a big infrastructure there. The sound system's probably going to suck. There's probably going to be like one hot dog vendor and a couple of guys selling sodas. And I mean, it's going to be terrible compared to the infrastructure in the big arena where every night, a big concert or a team plays.
And also, I realize I quoted Dave, but the great article is by Lindsay Gibbs. And yeah, it's, the point you just made, Patrick, is in the article, well stated. It's, if you want something to grow and if your store can handle 20 people and you're hoping for growth, and that's what anybody in the WNBA would probably try and tell you with a straight face, right? Okay, why would you ever, ever, ever then decide to buy a smaller store? Mm-hmm. Especially when there's a larger store you're allowed to use, in theory, cheaper, right? Like the Wizards, to your point, wanting a big event in these arenas, that's one of the things cities don't seem to realize. You buy this gigantic stadium and you sell yourself on, well, we can have all these concerts and people can come through it. Well, if you have a professional sports team in that arena and you have variable dates, this actually happened to the Pepsi Center, I believe, when the Nuggets went far in the playoffs. They had to kick the WWE out and say, oh, well,
wasn't there was it a baseball team that had a conflict with Taylor Swift?
Oh,
I think there was a baseball team where like Taylor Swift was supposed to play, but the baseball team made the playoffs. So they were like, oops, sorry.
Well, guys, in the NBA, the Spurs are the biggest example of this, right? They have the rodeo road trip every year where they have the hellaciously long road trip because they have to have a rodeo at their arena.
And Chicago has the circus,
brings in
right?
Way more money than the NBA for that stadium.
And then Chicago has the circus. Yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, it's like these things are not built to be what they're sold as. They're not built to be like venues where you can have just big concerts randomly because you have sports teams in them. So it's like you should have, if the WNBA and NBA are part of the same organization, which they are, you should have them sharing buildings because they can schedule together. Whereas, like, as you're pointing out, hoping for Taylor Swift in June when there's an outside chance that, yes, even your horrible team might make it far in the playoffs is a horrible, horrible strategy. So this makes no sense, and it's just this is, I guess, the Broken Record podcast this week, but it's another example of a billionaire saying, I would really like a fancy toy, and I would really like to not pay for it. How can I ask a city to fund it for me?
Yeah. Sounds exactly like that.
And on that note, and this is even more, like I said, Brian, I'm going to keep asking to cheat off your notes. A freaking gigantic Deadspin article on Kevin Johnson. We've had tons to say on Kevin Johnson before. The Maloofs, the Kings, staying in Sacramento. Why are the Kings still in Sacramento? And so this article about Kevin Johnson, I didn't realize it was this bad. I already knew that clearly he had ulterior motives for keeping the Kings in Sacramento, as was clear. But even just as a politician, I mean, he makes a lot of the other ones look good.
I feel like you could make a pretty good HBO show around like the Kevin Johnson administration and things his administration has done in terms of like
that's the first thing I thought
corruption and scandal.
It's like Boardwalk Empire type stuff.
Yeah.
So what is like the big, because this article was huge. Like, what is the full dossier of everything Kevin Johnson has done, and how does he still have a job?
So, I mean, a lot of it is like sort of old school style uh, intimidation and uh, like, for example, most recently there was a thing where um, his campaign, so a reporter wanted some information based on the Freedom of Information Act, and he filed some kind of a, a form saying, "Hey, give me these public documents," and Kevin Johnson's administration basically said, I want you to withdraw that request or we're going to sue. And I mean, unsurprisingly, the journalist said, fuck you, I'm not withdrawing that request. And so he ended up actually his foundation ended up suing the government itself. Like he basically ended up suing his own government because he didn't want the documents disclosed. Um, it's kind of the actual like sort of legal details are in the linked article is pretty crazy, and he has this. So he's the head of this big foundation. It's a big school private. Or he or his wife actually. Maybe it's his wife that is the head of this organization, but it's a big private organization that is all about privatizing charter schools, and so of course it's a pretty big, huge conflict of interest that he, as a politician, is not only in his own city but in nationwide is campaigning to privatize schools, to privatize, to introduce private charter schools in all kinds of cities in America, and to get tax funding for those private schools. It's really, yeah, it's really kind of the depth of it is really kind of creepy. I mean, it is essentially the very epitome of using your public office um, to enrich yourself privately.
I think
And
what's kind of sad, and sports kind of shows this, is anytime you have someone where giving them $1 million could cause them to change their decision on an important thing, you should probably reconsider both that position and their ability to get money. Because I can't fault a single governor or mayor when a city has an offer for a team and you say to them, "Hey, we'd really like to have this sports team here. Would you like $1 million?" And if that's enough to tilt their interests, and yes, it's fine for citizens to want a sports team, but like I can want a Tesla, and it's a very nice car, and there's a lot of good things about Teslas. It's a fantastic car. I can't really justify buying one. I don't have the money and the budget to do it, but that would be fantastic. So that's kind of the problem, and we notice that a lot with cities and officials. We brought up Scott Walker before,
yeah,
and
well, yeah, and the Tesla thing is a great thing because imagine you're like some middle income family and you can afford a Toyota, and that's what you can afford. But instead, the government said, no, we're going to force you to buy a BMW. I know all you want is a Toyota, but we're just going to take 20,000 extra dollars out of your pocket and force you to upgrade to a BMW. Because that's essentially what's happening with the sports arena deals. It's like people everywhere are big sports fans, but if you ask them to take the money out of their pocket and keep a sports team in that city versus moving to another city, they'd probably say, well, no, I can't afford that. But then at the same time, they don't seem to understand that their government is literally doing that to them. The government is literally taking money out of their pockets and forcing them to keep these teams. And it's kind of like it's one of those things where the price you are paying isn't transparent. So if you're not paying attention to what's happening, if you're not actually reading the news and following what's going on, you might be like, "Oh, sweet, the Kings are staying in Sacramento. That's great for me." Oh, I guess I didn't notice the fine print where I'm paying 5,000 extra dollars in taxes next year because the Kings are staying in Sacramento. It's like that's what's happening. The government is literally taking money out of your pocket and giving it to billionaires. For
it
and true, they're using it to buy a thing that you want, which is namely to have the Sacramento Kings if you're a Sacramento fan, but it's not a price you wanted to pay for it, you know? The
yeah,
government's forcing you to buy something.
that's what's funny is even because it's distributed amongst a bunch of people. If you were legitimately honest with everybody and said, "Hey, We're going to keep the Kings in Sacramento. I don't know the population of Sacramento. I'm going to guess 100,000. I'm going to guess that's low. But if you told every single one of them, it's only going to be $1 million. So each of you has to pay $10. If you asked all million people if they'd be willing to pay $10 to keep the Kings, I'm willing to bet like half of them would be like, no, I don't care. Because you can see the numbers, right? An NBA stadium holds 20,000 people. We can see the ratings numbers. Like if everybody in Sacramento legitimately wanted the Kings to stay, the arenas and stuff would be bigger. Ironically, this is a place where college sports is very obvious, where the big places like Texas and the South, they're so big that these stadiums get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they get boosters to give them more and more money to make more bigger and bigger stadiums because there's the demand for it there. But we don't see even in Los Angeles or New York, we don't see a 50,000 person arena for basketball because there's not the demand for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So by the way, on I guess Repeat Tuesday or whatever you want to call it, our last another favorite one of the things that will sound like a broken record about Brian. You sent this one out. He works for the Warriors, which makes this a funny thing for him to say.
Yeah, just real fast on Kevin Johnson. It's a really long article and it's complicated, so I recommend everyone checks it out. We'll supply the link, but it goes a lot deeper than what we just mentioned, though.
Oh yeah. It's like
there's a lot
it's like 15 pages. It's huge.
Yeah, so I mean, I said Boardwalk Empire earlier or House of Cards, whatever you want to pick. It's crazy kind of stuff. It's personal.
It's worse because
Yeah.
I knew about the Kings and I was like, how does this person have his job based on just the Kings? And then I read all this. I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, he's just a straight up corrupt political boss, apparently, which, by the way, breaks my heart. Full disclosure. Same college as me, same program, political science at University of California, Berkeley, even a few years kind of overlapping later on. I don't know him personally, but still breaks my heart. But no, this is stuff like, multiple sexual harassment lawsuits. He's accused of being a slumlord, similar to Donald Sterling, like owning all these buildings and not keeping them up to code and all kinds of other stuff. Taking over the, let me get the acronym right here, the National Conference of Black Mayors, I want to say it is, running it into the ground, suing it, using it then instead of talking about mayor issues to, try to push this private school agenda, taking, I think they said $12 million, maybe more, from the Walton Foundation, who is Walmart basically, to push this agenda, hiring a bunch of employees saying they're public employees, but they're really not, and then using both public and private employees to try to, push his wife's agenda. Yeah, there's a lot here, and more will probably come out.
It's impressive. I mean, I guess if you were going to say what former NBA player do you think would become a supervillain, I probably wouldn't have guessed Kevin Johnson, but good on him, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm thinking Bill Laimbeer would have been at the top of your list.
Boy, that one dunk he had in the playoffs was so nice, though.
Bill Laimbeer is an amazing WNBA coach, right?
He was at one point, yeah.
I thought he still is.
May still be.
New York Liberty.
Yeah. Anyway.
But Jerry West.
Jerry West, also a evil super genius, I guess. Who
Jerry West is just giving us this. He's just giving us our Yogi Berra moment, right?
Yeah.
So well, actually, Patrick, I enjoyed your rant on this. So there's we'll put the link in the thing, but he basically had a quote, and I'd like you to give your take on it.
Well, so the first quote that came around was pretty popular on Twitter. He said, "Give me the best players and give me a great coach, and we'll beat these analytically based organizations all the time." So, I mean, first of all, the heart of the problem is that the whole point of the analytics moment is let's try and identify the best players. I don't think very many people would argue that if you had the best players, you'll probably beat the other teams most of the time, because I don't think anyone's out there saying, yeah, man, our organization, we have the best players all the time, but we suck anyway. No one's ever saying that.
Although what I will give you is that was the breakthrough moment for me, which was key. And I think there are a few people that have this. It's like when Melo and Allen Iverson came together and the team didn't really improve significantly, that was when I had to go, okay, wait a minute. I'm told these are great, right? Both of these players periodically show up on the top 10 MVP lists on like ESPN and NBA.com. You put them together, and it's a perfect swap out, right? You're swapping out a role player for a star, and the team didn't get better. What happened? So there is that, and there are definitely people that say that. They're like, why doesn't this team have synergy or whatever? But it's just worth noting that, every time players that the analytics people, most of us at least, get together that are good. You know, the Celtics, the Lakers with Pau Gasol, the Heat, any team with LeBron James, they improve. You know, it is worth noting that they do better. So I can kind of see Jerry West's point, but it's like there are so few players at this point that the gut feel people think are great that the analytics movement doesn't also think are great. I mean, there's a few like even Kobe we think is overrated, but we still thought he was good. At this point, right, that logic just falls through because he's going, just give me the best players. You go, how do you define the best players? I noticed that, you know, for all the people that come and complain that we think DeAndre Jordan is an MVP candidate, including you, Patrick, that's harsh. For all the people that do that, you just like Tyson Chandler better anyway. It's fine.
Okay, yeah, but go on.
Sorry, throwing Patrick under the bus needlessly. But for all the people that yell and say, how can you think DeAndre Jordan is so great? No one ever comes and says, you know, it's really weird how much you're in love with LeBron James.
Yeah, yeah. It's like no one ever like bursts into the room and say, "You fucking morons! How could you possibly think Chris Paul is good?" You know that never happens, right?
Exactly.
And I think it's interesting that he like. I feel like they go to great lengths. Both him and Myers go to great lengths to try and say, well, you know, we don't really use that much analytics. It's like, okay, but pretty much all of the big key decisions that led to us winning in championships were based on analytics, like deciding to play, you know, Draymond Green and deciding to concentrate on an offense that shoots way more threes and doesn't shoot as many long twos and playing lineups where switching on the perimeter is our biggest priority so that we can guard against the three-point shot. All of that was pretty much based on analytics and you know, all of that was kind of why we won the championship. But we don't make any decisions based on analytics. It's like, come on, man. You made a ton of decisions based on analytics. A ton of them were based on analytics. Pretty much everything Steve Kerr ever says in an interview lends credence to the fact that he gave analytics a great deal of weight in making his decisions, right? I don't understand why they are bending over backwards to try and maybe it's some kind of a double blind trying to obfuscate how much analytics goes into their decision making processes. Maybe it's trying to appeal to like the old school cadre of employees that they still have in the organization. I don't know what the hell it is.
But secretly they have all these spreadsheets packed away, hoarding.
I mean, it's not even, that's the thing is these decisions aren't made in front of a computer looking at spreadsheets, right? There are people with spreadsheets that then, you know, bubble up statistics to coaches that then, you know, basically I think that the way the Warriors played last year is an extension of the core thought, which 10 years ago was weird. 10 years ago, when the Suns were doing it, everybody said you could never win a championship with it. And over those 10 years, analytics people have kept saying over and over and over again, you know, teams don't shoot enough three-pointers. Three-pointers are really fucking important. Three-pointers are really efficient. Teams should try to shoot more three-pointers, etc. And this core thought is pretty much what powered all of the decisions that Steve Kerr made. He was like, yeah, threes are really important. And so therefore also defending against the three is really important. So let's try and place an emphasis on that. And it's, I mean, that core basic piece of reasoning was all came from analytics. And sure, it's a concept that has evolved over years and years and years of like stats nerds just screaming it in everyone's face, but it's still a thing, right? And now the whole league tries to pretend that that's not based in analytics. Oh, well, everybody knows the three-pointer is a really valuable, efficient weapon. Like, okay, but 10 years ago, everybody didn't know it. And when Michael D'Antoni was leading an offense that did it, everybody thought he was nuts and he couldn't win a championship with it.
And what I love about this kind of harkens all the way back to like taxpayers saying they want an NBA team. And then you're like, well, will you actually give us money for the team? And then they won't. You could just look at how many shots teams were taking from three 10 years ago versus now. And so if everybody knew, if Charles Barkley comes out and says, yeah, in the 80s, of course, we knew the three-point shot was valuable, you go, then why weren't you shooting them? Like, no one was shooting. Well, actually, Charles Barkley's a funny one because I think Brian sent this to me. He's one of like the worst three-point shooters in
Yeah.
terms of how many he took in his career versus how bad he was.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's see. We're at about 9:25. That was fantastic. I was going to say my kind of wrap up on that was Billy Bean's the other one. Billy Bean at some analytics conference made a comment that I was kind of making fun of on Twitter. He said, we didn't invent anything new. We pretty much stole everything. And I basically said, pretty much you just mean you found someone who could do math, because for as much as people try and talk big data and complicated math and fancy systems, I mean, I love the guys at Second Spectrum who do a lot of the sports VU tracking stuff. And one of them even gave a TEDx talk. Sports, virtually every sport, in fact, I'm going to say every sport, is not that complicated because it's a closed system with a set of rules and we know what wins it. And football's not that hard. You want to get more points than your opponent. Same with basketball, same with baseball. And we know how those occur. So none of the stats are that complicated. So I always kind of bristle when I see people talk about analytics, when what they're really saying, maybe, and this is the best bet I'll give to Jerry West, is a lot of these people that kind of bring up analytics to us are kind of just selling snake oil or making stuff up or overcomplicating stuff. And I don't really like that. And I actually agree with that, because a lot of
and it's no
people
wonder guys like Jerry West are like, well, that sounds like bullshit.
Oh, I was going to
so
say
many
the same thing. Didn't this remind you guys of Barkley? Because we defended Barkley when he came out against analytics, because we said, yeah, the actual stuff he's talking about is snake oil. Same with Stan Van Gundy at Sloan a few years ago. You guys remember that? He said, I don't believe in analytics. And he went on to talk about 30 minutes straight in the most analytically sound manner possible.
Yeah,
So I think a
Arturo
lot
and I
of
were in
it's
the audience for that.
nomenclature, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when analytics, I got in this argument a while back on the podcast where I was saying I don't really like the phrase because the term doesn't really mean, same as sport versus esport at this point. The phrase doesn't really benefit you. It doesn't really cut the thing down enough. Saying you like analytics doesn't mean anything in sports at this point. So whenever these come out, I just kind of go, okay, I don't care, because you're right. Saying you have an analytics squad, saying you're analytically based, saying you're an advanced stat fan in sports doesn't mean anything anymore. And I actually have to talk to you a little bit to see if you know what you're talking about. Patrick, you have a hard stop at 9:30. We're at 9:27. Let's just go to shout outs. Do you have any this week?
I have, well, 1.5, 2 shout outs. So big news on Twitter today. The Black Panther is going to be, the famous Marvel comic, The Black Panther, is going to be written by, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ta-Nehisi Coates. And so I'd like to give a shout out to Ta-Nehisi Coates? Ta-Nehisi Coates? I'm not actually sure how to pronounce this. And that's terrible, but I'm a big fan of his nonfiction writing. And anyway, it's going to be really cool to see what the Black Panther plot lines look like in the future. So I'm really looking forward to that. So that's a shout out to both him, I guess, and whatever editor at Marvel was smart enough to do the deal and give this guy the job.
Yeah, I mean, they're taking their time, but I am happy that Marvel is making progress in a lot of places.
I mean, he's a great follow on Twitter for lots of reasons. Like the social justice ones are good enough, but then also he's a huge comic nerd, and I love to read his tweets on comics.
He's just a really smart guy.
I felt like it was funny because you brought that up, Patrick, and I was like, I should follow. And I was like, I already am. Excellent. I win. All right, so those are your 1.5. Brian.
Yeah, so we mentioned the PBS article earlier about extra CTT stuff, so check that out. And the other concussion follow-up was this SB Nation article from, I guess it was a while back now, but yeah, apparently Sony, their leaked emails show that they did not go all the way condemning the NFL. They pulled back quite a bit, and the quote they use in the title here is they avoid kicking the hornet's nest of the NFL. So this concussion movie with Will Smith probably will not be as hard-hitting as we may expect. Let's see. I think I had one more real fast for you guys.
You got to do the NC dubs, man.
Yeah,
one.
We'll get this in here. Our favorite guy, Michael Carter Williams, who we are a fan of as a basketball player for sure, but he
is turnover prone. That is worth noting.
Well, for anyone who missed this, I think almost everyone saw it on Reddit probably, but here it is. Yep, Bull Durham style, just throws it right at that cameraman. So anyway, great throw. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Awesome. I'm going to give a shout out to John Floyd in the comments from our last week's podcast. He actually watched the Mighty Ducks animated television series, answered based on that. I don't know if that's winning or losing at life, but that's my shout out. The other shout out's already fantastic, so I'll give that. That's been our show. We're the Boxscore Geeks show. If you found it not through the site, you can find us at boxscoregeek.com. Upvote us on iTunes and Stitcher, where you can find the show as the Boxscore Geeks Show. We're live on twitch.tv/NerdNumbers. We're finding a new slot. It'll probably be Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll let you know when that's updated. In case you missed the live show, which you might because we're moving stuff around, you can find us on YouTube /NerdNumbers. And with that, we'll see you next week.